within
The video is called MLK's Assassination Conspiracy Explained.
10 days, you and your family will be killed. Now, in Montgomery, our home was bombed twice. Today, we still confront threats through telephone calls and through the mail.
It's 1964, and a package has just been sent to Martin Luther King Jr.'s house in Atlanta, Georgia. The package contains reels of tape, and on that tape, there's blackmail, as well as this one-page letter. The letter is written in the voice of one of King's supporters. It's riddled with typos and corrections.
Hold on. In view of your low abnormal personal behavior.
One of King's supporters. It's riddled with typos and corrections. And the letter tells King that he should, quote, look into his heart, because he is, quote, a complete fraud, a great liability to black people. It refers to the tapes that are in this package, which is an audio supercut of evidence showing King committing adulterous acts, sexual encounters with his girlfriends and mistresses. The letter calls him a, quote, dissolute, abnormal, moral imbecile, abnormal animal, a beast. What incredible evilness. Satan could not do more. The letter tells King that his end is approaching, and that he has just one thing left to do. And he knows what it is. He has 34 days in which to do it. This letter, insinuating that Martin Luther King Jr. should end his own life, was not sent by a disenchanted follower, and it was not typical hate mail.
I'm confused.
This letter was sent by some of the most powerful men in the United States, the top leaders of the FBI.
And of course, I received numerous threatening letters. You and your family will be killed.
Dr. Martin
I
Luther King
understand it.
Jr. was shot and killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee.
I understand it. He's explained the theory through, like, saying, oh, this is a real fact. This is a real thing, right? Or whatever, right? As, like, just to make the story, right? Or no? Well, here's the theory, guys. The video is called Conspiracy Explained. That quite literally says that it's not proven or factual.
More than half of Americans don't buy the official account that a lone racist gunman was behind the death of Martin Luther King on that day in Memphis in the late 1960s. That number is more like 88% for black Americans. Those who don't believe it include the ones that were standing next to him when it happened. They include his family. An exhaustive congressional investigation found that King's murder was, quote, likely a conspiracy. But there's actually a lot more to the story than who pulled the trigger. And thanks to recently declassified documents, thousands of them that we've been going through, we can now shed a light on the FBI in the 1960s, what they were up to, and what that teaches us about who really killed Martin Luther King. Before we move on, a quick note from our sponsor.
Yeah, you're right. You're
Sponsors
right. A conspiracy is fucking when people conspire to do something. It's like a plan or whatever. It's just because most of the time when people say conspiracy in media, it's like
So in the late 1960s,
it's like conjecture.
There was a secret war going on between these two men. One of them wielded the immense, opaque power of the United States' Federal Bureau of Investigations. The other man belonged to America's long-oppressed minority and fought this war using the weapons of compelling words and a deep philosophical commitment to non-violent protest.
My feeling is that the vast majority of Negroes in the United States believe in nonviolence as a basic tactic for social change. Nonviolence. The nonviolence is really the only way that we can follow.
That if every Negro in the United States turns against nonviolence, I'm going to stand up as a lone voice and say this is the wrong way.
In 1960s America, nonviolence turned out to be an incredibly powerful tool for waging this struggle, because it always resulted in the same thing, the inevitable crackdown of excessive violence by law enforcement and counter-protesters. And when that was then covered and shown to the general population, it was so starkly clear who was right and who was wrong in the situation.
King felt from a strategy in terms of
Because people are not really moved by ideas, more by emotions, you know.
And teenagers and
So you have to make it clear to them.
Posed, shot, murdered, maimed, or simply wanting to exercise their rights as citizens. These images were very powerful.
Or you see a guy being beat up for no reason, then you're gonna feel pity, right?
That represented what Black Americans knew all too well was how they were treated by the American system. But now it was just public. King led 40,000 to protest segregated buses for over a year, resulting in the desegregation of public buses in Montgomery, Alabama. He went to the most segregated city in America to lead sit-ins in segregated restaurants and lunch counters. Protesters would peacefully kneel in churches and libraries. They marched on City Hall. And King would always get up with his powerful, stirring words to remind these protesters about the importance of their core philosophy.
We go back to the buses. Let us be loving enough to turn an enemy into a friend. Nonviolent protest against injustices and indignities experienced.
That the idea that you were going to bludgeon your enemies or destroy your enemies into some form of solidarity where it wouldn't just be permanently armed.
Check it. I mean, that's just because it isn't that I feel maybe because I don't look at a lot of politics that we don't have strong leaders that continue to reiterate that as like the main thing. Almost maybe because like I feel like maybe they kind of benefit from it, or they just say like over and over again, like violence just goes against whatever your motive is, whatever your message is. If you have violence, it goes against your message. It doesn't matter what it is. And if you just keep reiterating that, but because they benefit from it, it's almost like they don't give a fuck. They just don't say anything about it. Oh, it's like, oh, this guy's getting like clouded. Oh, it is what it is, and you just keep moving on. But like, I kind of applaud that. It keeps like reiterating that, you know.
He thought was an illusion, persistent illusion that we constantly make. That's one of the objections about militarism, that it's based on a fantasy.
King and many of these protesters were arrested. From jail, King wrote a letter about why he was leading these demonstrations in Birmingham. August 1963, letter from Birmingham jail. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And that now was their time, for they had, quote, waited for more than 340 years for their God-given constitutional rights. This is the only way to change what was the status quo in America, where vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers, hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and brutalize, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters. And after trying many different ways of addressing this, nonviolent direct action would build creative tension in the society. It would dramatize these issues so that they could no longer be ignored. This was his strategy for change and equality for his people, and it was working. Lunch counters, restrooms, and drinking fountains were desegregated across Birmingham. And as King predicted, the spectacle of peaceful protesters being violently cracked down on spread across the country, elevating the movement to an unambiguous moral high ground that couldn't be put down by force and arrests and violence by law enforcement.
I think what it means by creative tension is that it's like an alternative mode to do it, right? It's almost like a social experiment of like doing something by default, right? That makes you re-question the things that you already know are real. Like for most people, it's like, oh yeah, Bible or this is that, right? And everybody's like almost brainwashed. They're breaking these mindsets, right? But if you just, there's some things that you do, like sitting down in a certain place or whatever, it makes people like question, oh yeah, why is it like that or whatever, right? And that causes real change, no? Is that not how it is?
Now and we'll continue to carry on our mass protest.
But Martin Luther King was challenging an old, entrenched system. And when you disrupt a system like that, you create enemies.
Either you give the Negro his God-given rights and his freedom, or you face the fact of continual social disruption and social chaos.
His enemies included those that you would imagine, like the Ku Klux Klan, whose leaders allied with local police in the South and who stated that killing MLK would eliminate all racial problems in the South. You also had pro-segregation groups like the White Citizens Council, who tried to convince the federal government that King's growing movement had communist connections. But it wasn't just these overtly bigoted groups. His enemies also included business owners, real estate developers.
Chat, that means that these guys believe that you can kill an ideology by killing somebody. Well, you can't really kill an idea like that. It's just not.
Developers, landlords, employers,
it's not dumb,
all of whom benefited from the status quo. Discrimination in hiring practices, housing, and mortgages. Then, of course,
some other guys gonna show up and do the same thing.
Most of them from the South, almost all of them from the South. But among King's enemies was a Department of Justice agency that was powerful, whose job it was to protect Americans and to enforce the laws of the country.
J. Edgar Hoover served as the agency's director. FBI building houses the Bureau's Washington headquarters.
So remember, it's the 1960s, it's the Cold War. There's an obsession with finding communist sympathizers, anyone who is sympathetic to our big enemy, the Soviet Union. And the director of the FBI at the time was named J. Edgar Hoover. He would be the director of the FBI for like decades. So as King's movement grew, Hoover became suspicious that the movement wasn't a grassroots rising up for equality and racial justice, but rather a communist plot to sow division in American society. So it's 1963, Martin Luther King and his followers are planning this massive march in Washington, D.C., and Hoover tasks his head of domestic intelligence, William Sullivan, to go out and investigate how much influence the Communist Party has over this movement. And 5 days before the March on Washington, Sullivan...
Jack, it feels like everything is always like, oh, we have to do this because communism back in the days, and now these days it's we do everything because of terrorism, and it's just like, what's the next meta? What, because of AI, or what is it like?
Them delivers.
I'm just wondering. I'm just looking for the next patch.
The report concludes that even though the Soviet Union had spent tremendous sums of money and time and issued lots of propaganda to try to infiltrate this movement, that in fact there was, quote, no known substantial implementation of communism within King's movement. The movement was about racial inequality in America, a real pressing issue. Communism had nothing to offer and nothing to do with it, says this report that was delivered to Hoover 5 days before the March on Washington. But you can see right here, Hoover didn't like it. You can see right here at the bottom of the memo, this is Hoover's handwriting in this declassified document. It's kind of an angry moment. Communism's influence on King isn't infinitesimal, as Sullivan's report had concluded. Sullivan says that Hoover was so mad about this that he stopped talking to Sullivan for months. Sullivan had to, quote, change our ways or we would all be out on the streets, give Hoover what he wanted, or risk the consequences. And what Hoover wanted was King to be tied to communism so that he would have an excuse to spy on him.
99% of people, unfortunately, they don't go to their boss and say, you are a horrible affront to human decency. I will quit this job rather than carry out your directive. They go and they do their job. They say, oh yeah, you were right, boss.
And soon, the FBI would give him exactly what he wanted.
They called it the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. In the lead, Martin Luther King.
Today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
Determination that the American society shall have no rest until it is a society of free men, whatever their color.
Where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
2 days after the March on Washington, Sullivan begins his repentance process by delivering this memo from W.C. Sullivan, August 30th, 1963. Sullivan, who again just produced this big report saying that King had nothing to do with communism, has changed his tune just a few days later. Turns out that the Communist Party does wield substantial influence over black people in America, and that in light of King's powerful demagogic speech, oh, and by the way, the demagogic speech he's talking about is this one.
I have a dream
King now stands head and shoulders over all other black leaders in the country, that we must mark him now as the most dangerous black person in the nation from the standpoint of communism,
that's not
race,
what the letter says.
and national security. The plan would be, according to Sullivan, to completely discredit him, to, quote, take him off his pedestal. The thing is, they were kind of stuck. They didn't have a great plan for putting down this movement. King had achieved the moral high ground, and so they needed to fight morality with morality. They could undermine him and his moral philosophy, then just
I
maybe
think
they
in
could
context
stop
it's
his
fine,
movement.
but it's whatever.
So that the African American community would be, quote, left without a national leader to steer them in the proper direction. So Hoover and his agents cook up some thin evidence that tie Martin Luther King to communism, and they get approval from the Attorney General to spy on King. But what they don't tell the Attorney General is that they're not actually looking for communism. There is no communism here, and they know that. What they're looking for is whatever they can get to take him off his pedestal. Okay, what we are looking at here is a list of every wiretap and bug that was put on Martin Luther King. Side note, whenever I see these big blocks of redacted text,
Holy shit.
I just have to know, like, what could have been so juicy that they had to black it out? Like, we're already looking at, like, the sins of the FBI, and there was something even more secret that we just will never see. Too bad.
Chat.
We're looking at wiretaps.
Chat, I wish they interjected with like some source, whatever, that explain to people that want to know, like why certain legal documents are blacked out. I think a lot of people don't know this because law is kind of complicated, whatever. What are the limitations to speech or disclosing of information that make it that they're allowed to black out some stuff, you know?
Which is basically the ability to listen in on phone conversations.
Like what are the possibles?
At a variety of locations. There's his home in Georgia, and then there's a couple hotels in California. There's a home in New York City.
Maybe
and
HIPAA
there's a bunch
shit,
of microphones. Microphone or bug is just when the FBI trespasses into someone's space and puts a microphone that then records everything that happens in that space. So you see them doing this at the Willard Hotel here in Washington, D.C., hotels in California and Hawaii, hotels in New York City. So the main tactic here was to follow MLK as he traveled around the country and to bug and tap his hotel and telephone and spy on everything he said, every person he talked to. Here in the middle of all of these memos, you have this handwritten note to the director saying, obviously these are particularly delicate surveillances. We should be very cautious in terms of non-FBI people who may from time to time necessarily be involved in some aspect of installation. Like, we gotta really keep this under wraps because it is totally not okay what we're doing. In short, what they create.
Alright, chat, this is like this will sound crazy. You know what I wish people did, chat? Is I wish when people are gonna die when they get old, they die properly. And what I mean by that is like people that did shit like this, you know what I wish they did? When they had like a letter that die, like they did older, right? And it just says all things that they've done, right? That they think is like sketchy or whatever, right? To at least let the world know, like, hey guys, like I gotta be honest with you guys, this is like fucking, like we did this and we did that, right? Like maybe properly, as in like release what you know about the world before you leave it, you know?
Created was, quote, the most complete surveillance imaginable. Unsurprisingly, even after all of this spying, they didn't find communism. There was no communism here. What they did find is exactly what they needed to, quote, take him off his pedestal. They found sex tapes.
The family gets fucked.
These FBI documents that were declassified a few years ago contain the summaries of what the FBI agents say that they heard on these tapes. We don't have the actual tapes yet. And they paint a picture of Dr. King as a womanizer with girlfriends and prostitutes in Las Vegas, New York, Washington, D.C. These memos say that King would get excessively drunk and sleep with women while using, quote, the vilest language imaginable, excessive consumption of alcohol, which served only as a backdrop to the acts of degeneracy and depravity many of which committed in a communal atmosphere. I mean, it's a lot of graphic descriptions, some of which don't shine a good light on Dr. King. Running naked, drunk white prostitutes up and down the halls of a hotel in Las Vegas.
They saw his alleged infidelity as exactly the kind of deviance that would allow them to stigmatize the broader Black community, to undermine King's leadership, put his life in turmoil, make him unable to do this job, and to diminish his standing among the broader public.
This surveillance, which again was supposed to be about communism connections, was used to gather a whole swath of ammunition for this war, where Hoover and Sullivan were trying to knock King off of his moral pedestal, to undermine the morality that made King's movement so powerful and unstoppable.
Champ,
but wait.
Here's a fucking molten take. You don't have to be morally above everybody in all aspects to be above somebody morally in one aspect. That's just kind of how it is.
Yep.
It's like if I
True.
say, guys, don't rob banks. Don't you smoke weed and do cocaine? Okay, yeah. So what? I mean,
really quick, we can't really move on before
what
we
I just said about the
talk
bank is
about
still
how
correct.
to think about this evidence, and we struggle with this a lot. We talk to a lot of different people with different
It
views
doesn't
on
matter
how they interpret
what you
this.
are.
And here's my take.
If what you say is right, then it's right.
In most
Doesn't matter what you
stories
are.
that I do would be
Or who
rock
you are,
solid. This
you know?
is FBI intelligence, declassified, and usually these analysts are reporting dispassionate, objective evidence that we can use. The problem here is that I know too much about the context surrounding how this intelligence was gathered and the motive for doing so. Future investigations would clearly state that the FBI was riddled with racism, and that it was a bunch of white agents all jockeying.
I mean, wasn't like everybody racist back then, dude?
Yep.
Like, dude, most people were racist back then. It is what it is.
Or
Like,
the approval of their leader, J. Edgar Hoover, a man who we know now, in black and white we have seen, was willing to ignore analysis and intelligence that contradicted his own personal views. And he was willing to drag the entire Bureau along with his theories. Disagreeing with him meant being out on the streets. The agency would produce what he wanted to hear, or there would be consequences. So when I read these reports from agents who go out with the mandate to collect evidence that will knock Martin Luther King off of his pedestal, I have kind of a hard time trusting how they interpret it, especially when I'm not looking at the primary source. I'm looking at agents' interpretation of audio recordings. These aren't transcripts. These are summaries. They're not visual. They're audio. And to me, they're tainted with deep racist bias. As someone who seeks truth and looks for evidence, that's a problem.
Yeah, I like this guy a lot, okay? But this will sound so dumb, chat. I wish he dressed differently just for his videos. Even though he dresses like this in real life, maybe, right? Just a video, because, dude, it makes him look biased. It makes him look like a libtard. I said it, dude. It is what it is.
Now,
I guess I'm just being the voice of the public, okay?
And at that point, we will have the opportunity to
also the
listen to those
chain
tapes and
underneath
assess
your
whether or
shirt,
not
man. What are
they
you
change
doing?
in any way our legacy
What
and
is
our view
that?
of Martin Luther King as an individual. But for now, this is not conclusive evidence for me of anything other than the abuse of power at the FBI. So it's 1964. The FBI has been spying on King's every move. They have all these reports of his adulterous behavior. And this is when Hoover's nightmare comes true. Martin Luther King Jr. is selected to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, the ultimate moral high ground. Hoover writes a letter to Sullivan saying, now is the time to act, to expose him. And it's just a couple days later when the FBI sends that package to King's house in Atlanta, with the tapes filled with sexual blackmail and a letter insinuating that it was time for King to end his own life in the next 34 days. We know for certain that this letter came from the FBI. It's like not speculation. A copy of the letter was found in Sullivan's files, though he claims that it was planted there. But what we don't know is exactly what was on those tapes. The tapes were also sent to the media, who didn't end up publishing them. But they also didn't expose the fact that the FBI was spying on Martin Luther King. It was a different media environment back then. But what we do know is that Hoover's plan to end King by gathering all this blackmail and sending it to his house didn't work. King was distraught. It was his wife who opened the package, heard the tapes. But King didn't stop. He was not knocked off his pedestal.
I mean, was it real though?
King continues to Oslo, he receives his prize. Suddenly, he's Person of the Year on the front of magazines, and he continues to lead a variety of social justice causes. His list of enemies continues to grow, especially as he joins the chorus of anti-Vietnam War protesters.
We have been wrong from the beginning of our adventure in Vietnam. We have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese people.
There is something about a war like this that makes people insensitive. It dulls the conscience. It strengthens the forces of reaction, and it brings into being bitterness and hatred and violence.
His movement expands into representing poor and underserved people of all races. He plans to lead another march on Washington, this one bigger than the last. About a month before this next big march on Washington was to happen, King was in Memphis, Tennessee, supporting the strike of mostly black trash collectors, protesting the lack of safety standards and their low pay. And that night, Martin Luther King gave his last speech.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
That night he returned to his hotel, staying in a room that he stayed in so often that it was actually named after him. And at 6:01 p.m. on April 4th, 1968, while he was standing out here on this balcony, a single shot rang out, hitting King in the jaw. He was rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead an hour later.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, 39 years old and a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the leader of the nonviolent civil rights movement in the United States, was assassinated in Memphis tonight. A sniper's bullet cut down Dr. King as he stood on a hotel balcony in Memphis.
Sniper?
In an hour, Dr. King was dead. That happened at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The nation was shocked.
That mustache was trash, dude.
The FBI launched an investigation, which led them to this man, James Earl Ray, a 40-year-old fugitive who had escaped from a Missouri prison in a bread truck a year earlier. Ray had rented a room across the street from King's Motel earlier that day. Ray allegedly aimed and shot his rifle from this bathroom window. Shortly after the shooting, Ray fled to Canada, then England, then Portugal, and back to England. His end goal was a country in southern Africa called Rhodesia, which is modern-day Zimbabwe. But he was apprehended at the airport in England and sent back to the United States, where he was arrested.
He said that Ray was carrying 2 Canadian passports and a fully loaded pistol when he landed at London from Lisbon.
He immediately pleaded guilty, presumably to avoid the risk of the electric chair. And then he was sentenced to 99 years in prison. 3 days later, Ray went back on it.
Well, hold on,
saying
Chet,
that actually, no.
Chet, is that like some prison escapees? Is that what it is? Or was I mislistening?
He didn't kill MLK, claiming that he was set up, that he was a part of a larger conspiracy to kill King.
What was this guy?
Those close to King didn't accept the official explanation that Ray was the lone gunman who did this. Perhaps they were...
Some prison escapee that they couldn't get after so many years. Some guy that like, and how old is he now? He's really old, right? And he just so happens to have some political motive or some shit, and have a sniper who's good enough to fucking do a single headshot on a moving target from some fucking window or some shit, right? Bro, this is gonna dank.
All too familiar with the horrifying tactics used by the United States government to spy on, intimidate, discredit, and threaten Martin Luther King. Over the course of reporting the story, we opened up a lot of rabbit holes when it came to the conspiracy theories surrounding this assassination. We wanted to really confront them and try to understand what evidence exists and what evidence doesn't, and what is valid and what's not. The lack of faith in the FBI and scrutiny into this case has revealed some pretty significant holes in the explanation, some unexplained things, fishy circumstances, destroyed evidence, timelines that don't add up, witnesses that contradict the real story. A lot of things that make it hard to accept that a 40-year-old fugitive could pull off a sophisticated assassination in one shot and escape through 3 countries. But the investigations done since then have concluded that it was Ray who fired the shot. This includes the House Select Committee, a congressional investigation that concluded that Ray did it, though they say it was likely a conspiracy, that there were other people involved, funders, though they say it wasn't the government. The King family continued to sue and search for answers. Then in the 90s, this man comes forward and says that he was a part of it, that he was given money to hire someone to kill King. The King family...
Okay, chat. At the time, during that time,
that's just
during
fake.
that like moment of tension, couldn't there be a significant amount of people that were trying to get him or kill him? A lot of racists or groups, even government or not, random people, families. I mean, there was a fuck-ass ton, right?
Everybody was against him,
There's a significant good chance that even though it looks a certain way, right? It's still... The government was maybe still gonna do it, right? But the person who actually did it just...
Hold on. What if they were all conspiring? What if they were all conspiring against him, right? That makes a lot of fucking sense. That makes a lot of sense, dude.
Under a wrongful death suit. It was a civil case, so there wasn't any like jail time.
It's a high chance
that the assassination was a conspiracy that included others, including government agencies. But to be clear, this lawsuit from the 90s with this guy named Jowers was not a legitimate piece of proof for this. It didn't include a real defense, and it didn't include any consequences. There was a symbolic $100 payment to the King family. But what it did is shine a light again on the fact that a lot of people aren't satisfied with the official story of who killed Martin Luther King.
Okay, sniper is just a word, okay? Bro, you're talking in 1960, getting a fucking scoped rifle was probably easier than getting a fucking loaf of bread at the motherfucking supermarket, dude. What the fuck?
King. The fact is that even after all of these lawsuits and investigations and a mock trial that was like live on TV, there is no conclusive evidence that ties the FBI or any other government agency to the assassination.
Not scoped. There's a picture of it. Guys, the picture showed a scoped rifle, literally. Am I wrong?
Nation of Martin Luther King.
It showed it. Guys, it showed it, motherfucker. I've been paying attention. Scope.
Witnesses fund that conspiracy. That lawsuit from the 90s with this guy named Jowers was not a legitimate piece of proof for this. It didn't include a real defense, and it didn't include any consequences. There was a symbolic $100 payment to the King family. But what it did is shine a light again on the fact that a lot of people aren't satisfied with the official story of who killed Martin Luther King. The fact is that even after all of these lawsuits and investigations and a mock trial that was like live on TV, there is no conclusive evidence that ties the FBI or any other government agency to the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I'm saying that as somebody...
Okay, you look at this, chat, and you look at a story like, let's say, John Lennon or some shit, right? is there like 5 conspiracy theories about who killed John Lennon and why and what group? Not really, right? Could you still? I'm just saying it.
Somebody who feels like
you understand what I'm saying?
It wouldn't actually be outlandish that the
There is,
FBI did this. After all, the next year they showed that they were willing to assassinate black men who were subversive in their eyes.
We know that there were threats on King's life that they did not share with him. We know that they didn't insist on protecting him the way that it is their obligation to do so. One of the only reasons to have an organization like that is to protect people who are subject to secretive threats and conspiratorial action. They didn't do that.
Guilty by omission, for sure.
After looking into all of this, really grappling with it, understanding the reality of the FBI at this time, I think the real reason why people think that the government killed Martin Luther King is because, in a sense, they did. What I've shown you today, all of these FBI transcripts and evidence from the 60s, is rock solid proof of one thing. J. Edgar Hoover and his bureau of powerful, unelected men wore their badges of justice and then used their power to threaten the life of Martin Luther King. They did so the moment they saw a black man getting too powerful and threatening the power that they relied on to keep themselves on top, and they couldn't stand it. Hoover and his FBI used the sacred levers of justice given to him by the American people to carry out a personal racist vendetta against King and his movement. A movement that used morality and words and ideas and nonviolence to try to level the playing field for the oppressed class in this country. But to Hoover, all he could see in this was a black man that was threatening his power.
You know, I would say that the FBI certainly did, help to set the atmosphere around King, that he was someone who was dangerous and who was trying to destroy the country, to help solidify the way public opinion.
This guy's voice, dude.
Not only did that congressional report find that racism was rife at the FBI, but they also note that the FBI's campaign against Martin Luther King didn't end after he died. When Congress was discussing whether or not to make MLK's birthday a national holiday, the FBI sent people over to lobby the Congress to vote against it. And luckily, they failed. Today, here in our nation's capital, between Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln, King has been resurrected in granite, 30 feet tall, a stone of hope that is breaking through a mountain of despair.
Wait, that's a cool ass fucking. Hold on.
And yet,
it's not cringe. That art is fucking sick. What? Wait, hold on.
Hope that is breaking through a mountain.
Why? That's fucking sick art. Are you kidding me?
That is cool.
Of despair.
It looks like communist art, though. Yeah, it's confirmed. He was working with the communists. Definitely, he was working with the communists.
Right down the road, not too far away, is the headquarters of the FBI, a building named after J. Edgar Hoover, commemorating a man who professionalized the Bureau during the Cold War, who fought against organized crime, but who was also the architect of racist corruption and governmental overreach, not just against King, but also against many American people. He implemented widespread domestic spying, including on politicians and presidents. He had dirt on them, the power to blackmail, the power to control. He hijacked the most powerful tools of justice to attack the movement that changed the world. And yet, here his building sits. It's perhaps the perfect symbol of how comfortable we are with maintaining old, broken systems that keep certain people powerful. How we let those structures remain in our capital, in our streets, in our politics, in our memories, and in our minds.
I say tonight to white America, there will be no rest There will be no tranquility in this nation until the Negro has his freedom.
I know, that was a good video.
Give the Negro the freedom, I guess, yeah.
If you deliberately shake a rock and get out of its foundation for a long time, and you deliberately do it for like, and you do that as almost your life's calling, at that point, it almost doesn't even matter who pushes the rock that makes it roll down the hill, right? I mean, it's just kind of how it goes, you know?
What the fuck is he?
That's kind of my view on it when after watching the video.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
How's that a question mark? How's that the lack of protection, the doubt that they set in the minds of people, the things that they were doing, the wiretapping, the everything around it. At that point, anybody could have killed them. They still really they really loosened that rock like really badly. Like that's just what it is.
Yeah, keep pushing the rock, cut.